Our character today is someone whose historical memory has long been ignored, if not erased. An inconvenient figure, someone who had an extremely adventurous life and who dedicated his existence to two ideals. One, his country, Poland, a nation that rose from the ashes after the Great War, a country that was erased once again during the Second World War and that fought tooth and nail to assert its identity. And the other is the concept of justice. Justice in the broadest sense of the word. Justice that must be for everyone, regardless of nationality, spoken language, or professed faith. This man, Witold Pilecki, is our subject today. A person whose incredible and adventurous life, I'm sure, will keep you glued to your seat or armchair until the end. Born on May 13, 1901 in Oleniec, which at the time was part of the Russian Empire, Witold Pilecki grew up in a family belonging to the minor Polish nobility, a nobility deeply connected to national identity and a patriotic tradition. Growing up in such an environment means absorbing from a young age a sense of belonging to a homeland that, as we mentioned in the introduction, at the time did not exist on the maps. Poland had once again been absorbed by Russia, Prussia, and Austria, erased from the map. Yet from a young age, Witold Pilecki grew up with his family's shared values: duty, sacrifice, and discipline. Taking part in youth organizations was an activity of rebirth. Discipline. He takes part in clandestine youth organizations that aim to keep Polish culture alive under foreign rule. Polish culture, Poland of rebirth, an activity of rebirth. The Great War, the geopolitical context begins to change rapidly and opens the way for the rebirth of the Polish state. In fact, in 1918, with the end of the conflict, Poland rises again, even though it has to fight against the Red Army to assert its right to independence, like many other young people. For Witold Pilecki, that moment represents not only a political victory, but a call to action. In fact, he enlists in the Polish armed forces and takes part in the war against Russia, against the Red Army, a conflict that ends in 1921, which establishes Poland's right to live again. Pilecki demonstrates military skill and a strong sense of responsibility. These are not common qualities, if you think about it. In fact, he can't be defined just as a soldier, but rather as a man deeply convinced that the value of freedom is something that must be defended, actively defended. After the conflict with the Red Army, Pilecki tries to build a more stable life for himself. He settles in the countryside, dedicates himself to agriculture and managing the family property. He gets married. He and Maria Ostrogska have 2 children. At first glance, the post-war period for Witold Pilecki is a time of peace, a tranquil phase. But Europe, between the 2 great world wars, has a fragile balance and is marked by political and ideological tensions. For this reason, too, Pilecki remains in the Polish army as a reservist. He doesn't completely leave that life behind, as if at that moment something is telling him to stay alert. And when in September 1939 Nazi Germany invades Poland, Pilecki, who had already been called back as a reservist, realizes that he was right. Also, because Germany is not the only enemy, there is also the Soviet Union. In concert, the 2 great totalitarian dictatorships of Europe at that time decide to make Poland disappear from the maps once again, dividing it between themselves with a secret pact. After the Nazi military aggression comes Bolshevik aggression from the east. And for Poland, in the end, once again, for Pilecki, a new phase begins, that of resistance, the Polish resistance. A phase that helps to establish a new model, the partisan model. It is Pilecki himself who joins one of the first underground organizations against the German occupation. In a difficult context marked by brutal repression, mass arrests, and deportations, the resistance operates in the shadows, gathers information, and organizes sabotage. It keeps hope alive. And it is precisely at this moment, in such a delicate time, that Pilecki makes what, in hindsight, will be the most incredible decision of his life. In 1940, some news reaches the Polish resistance from the city of Auschwitz, which is near Krakow. It's a small town known only for a railway junction. According to the information gathered, The Germans have requisitioned an old barracks to turn it into a prison camp. They have also given it a German name, Auschwitz. The initial information is fragmentary, but it's already enough to understand that it's better to keep an eye on the situation. At that time in Auschwitz, political prisoners, members of the resistance, and civilians are being held. Nothing suggests what will happen in the months and years to come. But the Polish underground leadership needs precise information. Rumors, assumptions, and the first bits of gossip coming from the local farmers who live nearby are not enough. And that's when Witold Pilecki makes his decision to get himself arrested voluntarily in order to be deported to Auschwitz. It's not an impulsive or suicidal act. It's a strategic mission, what we would call a 007 mission today, with specific objectives: to gather information about the conditions in the camp, to organize a resistance and internal intelligence network, and to prepare, if possible, a revolt or facilitate an external attack to liberate the camp. It's clear that this is a decision that involves enormous risks. No one at the time could have imagined what would happen inside those walls. Yet Pilecki accepts it. In September 1940, during a German roundup in Warsaw, he let himself be captured deliberately. He had false documents with him. They identify him as Thomas Serafinski. The Germans don't know exactly who he is. They only know that he is a partisan, like many others, and he is deported to Auschwitz. When he sets foot in the camp, it's the end of September 1940. Auschwitz has not yet reached the monstrous size it would in the following years. But it is already a place of systematic violence, designed to annihilate prisoners, first psychologically and then physically. The conditions are brutal: exhausting forced labor, chronic hunger, arbitrary punishments, public executions, and then diseases. Pilecki, like many others, becomes a number. Number 4,859, that is his prisoner number. The SS guards exercise total control inside Auschwitz, fueled by terror, but also by unpredictability. It took nothing, a wrong gesture, a look interpreted the wrong way, not taking off your cap quickly enough when a non-commissioned officer was about to pass by. It takes very little to be beaten or killed. Pilecki observes everything very closely, but not only that. He establishes a clandestine network inside Auschwitz, the ZOW network, Związek Organizacji Wojskowej, Union of Military Organizations. It is a network that has various objectives, including providing moral support to the prisoners, distributing food and clothes, if possible to gather information about the activities inside the camp, and with great difficulty to maintain contact with the outside. Pilecki operates with extreme caution. He knows very well that the camp is a constant trap. There are also informers who, just to get favorable treatment from the guards, act as informants. For this reason, his network is organized into small independent groups. It's a winning strategy because it prevents the entire network from falling into the hands of the torturers. One of the most important aspects of his mission is to communicate with the outside. Through clandestine contacts, Pilecki manages to get detailed reports out about what is happening: the inhuman conditions, the systematic executions, the construction of new camps, and the first signs of what will become mass extermination. Over time, Auschwitz changes, becoming not just a detention center but a site of genocide, especially after the Nazi organization decided to build gas chambers and industrial crematoriums. Pilecki is one of the first to directly witness the birth and operation of this system. His reports reach the Polish resistance and, through the resistance, the Allies. But there's a problem. What Pilecki writes is considered not credible. Who would have ever thought that the Nazis were so insane as to build a killing machine modeled after an industrial assembly line? That's why Pilecki's reports weren't believed for the first few months. They ended up in a drawer, gathering dust. Meanwhile, Pilecki is fighting to survive in Auschwitz. He has to adapt. He knows it's not easy, but he also knows that sooner or later he'll have to get out of there if he doesn't want to die. He comes up with an ambitious plan: organize an uprising inside the camp. The plan involves taking control of certain areas, neutralizing the guards, and finally, a mass escape of the prisoners. That's exactly what happened at Sobibor, and we've already told you about it in a video you can find on our channel. But Sobibor was much smaller. Auschwitz is huge, it has a much stronger garrison, and it has structures that are much harder to overcome, as if that weren't enough. The prisoners are extremely weakened. They don't have the strength to stage a real uprising, and from the outside there is no real support. Pilecki tries several times to contact the resistance and ask for help to get weapons into the camp and to ensure logistical support outside the camp, or even diversionary attacks that could distract the garrison and help the prisoners' efforts. But after almost 3 years in Auschwitz, he realizes that a revolt is impossible, unfeasible. So there's another possibility, another risk. Absolutely, go all in, escape, and escape on his own. In the spring of 1943, Witold Pilecki needs to escape. But how? How can he do it? So he trusts 2 companions, John Rizet and Witold. They are the ones who will have to help him with this impossible escape. All 3 of them work in a bakery that is located just outside the main perimeter of the camp, and it's a position that offers a rare opportunity. The plan, seemingly simple, is actually more complex. It involves neutralizing the only armed guard inside the bakery, then cutting the telephone lines, leaving during the night, and getting away as quickly as possible. It's a plan that requires perfection and perfect coordination. Not a single detail can be left to chance. On the night between April 26th and 27th, 1943, Witold Pilecki and his 2 accomplices put their plan into action. They manage to overpower the only guard present. They sneak out of the bakery. Once outside, they cut the telephone wires with a blade. This way, the alarm is delayed. Yes, they're out of Auschwitz, but it's not over. The entire area is under German control, and it doesn't take long for the patrols to discover the guard's body and raise the alarm, starting the search. The fugitives are being hunted, walking for days, often at night, finding shelter with farmers or contacts in the resistance. There are many uncertainties. There is exhaustion, hunger, nervousness, and constant risk, but in the end, they make it. They manage to reach a relatively safe area and re-enter the networks of the Polish resistance, which gives them shelter, feeds them, helps them recover, provides them with new documents, and makes them disappear. Once safe, Witold Pilecki begins to write down everything he has seen. These are no longer just the first reports that had come out of Auschwitz and ended up gathering dust in drawers. The so-called Pilecki report, which is a very substantial report, becomes one of the most detailed and earliest testimonies about Auschwitz. In the Pilecki report, he describes the structure of the camp in great detail, the system of terror and exploitation, and the gas chambers. It's something that no one had ever told before because no one had managed to escape with that information. But the Pilecki report is not just a chronicle, it's also an appeal. Pilecki insists on the need for military intervention to stop what is happening. Despite his information being extremely serious and extremely precise, the initial reactions are limited. The resistance commanders and the Allies are faced with a dilemma. Should they believe Witold Pilecki? Should they attack Auschwitz? Or should they postpone, knowing that there are other military priorities? It's clear this is something to remember, because despite Pilecki's efforts to be believed and to get a reaction from the Allies, maybe a bombing of Auschwitz, he runs into chains of command that slow things down, higher priorities. Still, Pilecki doesn't stop. After his escape, he continues to work with the resistance. He is in the ranks of the Armia Krajowa, the underground national army, that army led by Bor Komorowski, who, as we have seen, in the summer of 1944, sparks the Warsaw Uprising. Within that uprising, which we have already talked about, you can find the video on the channel, Witold Pilecki stands out as an infantry officer. He takes part in the very tough urban fighting inside the city. True guerrilla warfare. He sees his soldiers fighting bravely and falling one after another against an overwhelming military force, the German one, who has no qualms about using any weapon, including the monstrous Karlgerät mortars or the Sturmtiger, to crush buildings and bury many innocents under the rubble. That uprising, which began with great hopes with the Red Army now at the gates of the city just beyond the Vistula, turns into a devastating defeat. Warsaw becomes a heap of smoldering rubble with thousands and thousands of dead. Pilecki survives and is taken prisoner, but this time he is treated as a prisoner of war, interned in a military prisoner of war camp, no longer in Auschwitz. His war, the Second World War, ends in 1945. Pilecki is freed, but while for many that is the moment of peace, for him and for Poland the situation is much, much more complex. The country is not truly. The Soviet Union, which intervened from the East, gradually imposed a new system, a system of domination, cultural, social, and political domination. Little by little, Poland is turning into a state under communist influence, behind what would come to be known as the Iron Curtain. Pilecki finds himself facing another difficult choice. It's a bit of a recurring theme in his life: to stay abroad, safe, in exile like the members of the Polish government, or to return to his homeland and continue fighting. For the umpteenth time, he chooses the most dangerous path: to return to Poland. He finds that his country, the country he had loved so deeply and fought for, has changed. Day after day, week after week, the Soviet authorities shape Polish society, turning it into a socialist society modeled after the Soviet one. The Russian authorities consider the Home Army and the independent fighters as potential political enemies. Arrests, interrogations, show trials, these are becoming more and more frequent. Pilecki receives an order to gather information about the new regime and send it to London, where the other government is located, the nationalist government in exile. Once again, Witold Pilecki accepts and embarks on a clandestine activity, but in a completely different context. This time, there isn't such an obvious foreign enemy. There is an internal power, supported by a great power. In 1947, after less than 2 years of activity, Pilecki is discovered and arrested by the secret police. From that moment, his life speeds up, and it becomes brutal, because inside the prison, he is subjected to torture, to violent interrogations. He is deprived of sleep, and he is also subjected to primitive waterboarding techniques, all to make him confess his mission, the names of those who sent him, and his alleged accomplices. According to the testimonies of his cellmates, Pilecki reportedly told them that the torture he suffered in the Polish prison was worse than the treatment he endured at Auschwitz. This says a lot about what the Iron Curtain period was like. Despite this, Witold Pilecki tried to protect his companions and to limit the damage to his underground network. In 1948, after almost a year of detention, Witold Pilecki was put on trial, a classic political trial, accused of espionage and activities against the state, of collaborating with foreign powers. But the evidence that should be the basis of any fair trial, is either weak or blatantly fabricated. It's immediately clear that the verdict has already been decided. Pilecki is a traitor, according to some polls. For the established authorities, he is an enemy agent. Pilecki himself, during the trial, when he is given the floor, does not deny his actions. He only tries to lessen the consequences for others. He knows he is a dead man walking, and in fact the death sentence is handed down. The sentence. It is carried out on May 25th, 1948. One morning, Witold Pilecki, just 47 years old, is led into the courtyard of Mokotów prison in Warsaw. He is made to kneel, and an officer shoots him with the service revolver at the base of the neck. That is how Witold Pilecki dies. The body is buried in a secret location, probably a mass grave. It's a final attempt to prevent commemorations and emulation, but it's not enough. The regime decides on damnatio memoriae. His name is removed from every official record. His documents, including his report, the one that had even reached the Soviets, are hidden and destroyed. And even just talking about him, saying his name, can turn out to be extremely dangerous. For decades after his death, the name Witold Pilecki remained shrouded in silence, as if he had never existed. In communist Poland, his story is uncomfortable. A man who fought both against the Nazis and against the regime imposed by the Soviets. How should he be classified? That's why his figure is deliberately obscured. The testimonies are ignored, and the documents that mention him are censored. Everything changes with the wind of change that sweeps through Eastern Europe in the mid-1980s and at the start of the 1990s. The fall of the Polish regime finally allows access to the archives, making it possible to reconstruct the stories that remained hidden for too long. And it is in this context that the figure of Witold Pilecki begins to re-emerge powerfully. Historians, journalists, and researchers begin to recover his reports, analyze the testimonies of survivors, and reconstruct the role played by Pilecki within the resistance. And among the most important documents is his dossier, the Pilecki Report, in which he recounted what he had seen inside Auschwitz. Over time, the name of Witold Pilecki is gradually rehabilitated and honored, and he becomes one of the greatest Polish national heroes. The state of Poland has awarded him posthumous military honors, given him recognition, public commemorations, and named streets, roads, and squares after him. Today in Poland, Witold Pilecki is remembered for his courage, his resistance, and his loyalty to his values, even in the most extreme conditions. But what makes his story so extraordinary is not so much the fact that he fought, but the moral strength he showed in making such difficult choices. The choice to get himself arrested and interned at Auschwitz. The choice to organize the resistance, to plan an initial uprising, and then his escape, to continue fighting first against the Nazis and then against the Soviets. Today, historians consider the Pilecki Report to be among the first direct accounts of the Holocaust. Its importance is not only documentary, but also ethical. It shows how even in the most inhuman contexts there can exist, however fragile, spaces for choice and responsibility. In the contemporary world, the story of Witold Pilecki fortunately continues to be told, discussed, and studied, but it is not just an event of the past. We do not study history just to remember what happened in an automatic, rote way. We do it to question certain themes. For example, the relationship between the individual and established power, the courage to oppose injustice, and what freedom costs. The life of Witold Pilecki spans one of the darkest chapters of the 20th century. And we're not just talking about the Second World War. Totalitarian regimes, genocides, repressions, different political stripes, but all united by violence and the will to dominate. At the center of this story, it's not just about violence, but above all, the ability of an individual to act with clarity and determination. The decision to enter Auschwitz, the formation of the internal resistance, the escape, the armed struggle, the final sacrifice. Pilecki's life seems like a series of extreme decisions, always marked by danger. And even though his name was erased for too long, today he represents one of the most powerful symbols of the 20th century, because he is a symbol of determination. And you may ask, determination to do what? To defend rights, truth, and human dignity. And if that doesn't seem like much to you, then perhaps you still haven't understood the scale and importance of Witold Pilecki's story.